Hi, everyone. Welcome to UJUG. We're going to get started in a few minutes. With me on the screen is Mark Ridges, of course, our presenter, and Kate Conroe from Tech Systems. I've never said your last name. Did I say it right, Kate?
Yeah, you did. And okay. The funny thing is, I feel like it's pretty straightforward, but it gets butchered a lot.
What do you hear?
Conroe, cornrow.
Cornrow. Okay, that's interesting one. That's not bad. Yeah, okay. Okay, I understand it. So, like I said, we'll get started at 6. I wanted to ask both of you about the concept of remote work and how COVID has changed it. You both have a really interesting perspective that I want to get our audience. So, Kate, what are you seeing from a recruiting side with remote work? Tell me what you're seeing.
Sure. Yeah. To be honest, on my job as a recruiter has completely changed. So I've been doing this for about 5 years. Before COVID, kind of the standard thing in recruiting in Utah was I talked to people about positions I had here. If I came across a fantastic candidate that I didn't maybe have something immediately for, it was kind of the routine was like, well, cool, I'll keep you in my network. I'll reach out to you every once in a while. If I happen to come across something that's a good fit, I'll let you know. But I don't have to do that anymore. I can immediately say, what do you want? What's your dream company? Where do you want to go? And I can look in our national database for remote things now. We have an actual new little thing in the database where I can just click a box for 100% remote work and pull in anything across the nation that's 100% remote. I've got people at Disney, I've got people at Nike, companies that traditionally never allowed for remote work. You always had to move to their area. A lot of big companies like that people really, really want to work for and have never been remote in the past are now allowing for it. So it's very, very different
for candidates. So Mark, what are your thoughts on remote work?
I miss people. Oh, so I think my dog is actually truly now understanding English because I have no one to talk to but my dog. But yeah, no, it was a total game changer for me doing at least 50% of my work is training and conferences and stuff. And man, in March of last year, that just went away. And while the start of doing things virtually was kind of exciting, that only lasted about 3 or 4 weeks when I realized as a speaker, it's all the negative parts of speaking. There's no feedback. There's no, I don't see the energy from the audience. In most cases, I don't see any faces from anybody. And so I found when I would do, let's say, a half-day workshop or a full-day class or even a 3-day class, that it was about twice the energy and twice the exhaustion, quite frankly, of doing things in person. So I really, really miss it.
I don't probably draw energy from the crowd when you're there, right?
That's exactly. There is a feedback loop that happens when you speak, and you project all this energy, and on stage, the audience gives you that energy back, and then you get more energy, and you start getting more enthusiastic, and it's this like invisible cycle that keeps going. Well, I don't have that, and so you expend all this energy, and there's so little coming back. That it's exhausting. It's exhausting. So it's been quite a game changer for me.
Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kate, when Kate and I were talking the other day about the kind of the future of how we want to do things at UJUG, we talked about having presenters present remotely, and then she was suggesting give them some, details on the audience as far as so they can see the audience somehow.
Like have a camera on the audience because you're right. Like that feedback is huge. I think of every time that I've presented at UJUG, the last one I did that was kind of funny. Maybe some of you all remember when I got up there in a flight suit and talked about, Top Gun. And that wouldn't have been anywhere near as fun, trying to do that on a screen. It was all about looking at the audience and seeing, their faces at me being a super goofball and talking about how I'm going to be their co-pilot as a recruiter. It's so much more fun in person. And I will say, like, that's a big part of my job that I really did miss going remote, is taking people to lunch every day, going to UJUG, going to like the different networking events and things that I'm really involved in. Which, by the way, all of you in the audience, let's grab lunch because I'm back in the office now. So it's on me.
Time for lunch for sure. Okay, well, looks like we're at 6, so let's get started. I will show some slides here. Let me share my screen and we will get started. Okay. I have to do slides, right? I don't know. We should reinvent all sorts of things. So share screen, and then right here, share. Okay, and I'm going to maximize that. Okay, so do you guys see the slides? Okay, very good. All right, so everyone, welcome to UJUG. We've got another great interview style meeting this evening with Mark Richards. You might remember him from our actually biggest audience ever. We had, it was over 220 people at Lucid, and it at the facility, and it was a blockbuster presentation. So we've got Mark back for an interview where we're going to talk about a wide variety of topics, and I would encourage everyone to post a question in the Ask a Question feature here in Crowdcast. So there's an Ask a Question feature. That's how you will get your questions answered, and then others can vote on those. And so I've got a list of questions we've prepared, and hopefully that will stimulate conversations. That's the whole point of this format. So please be involved. We want your questions, and this is a chance for you to pick Mark's brain about a bunch of different things, instead of having to catch him at a conference or a presentation after the fact and fight for his attention. So we're using this online format as much as possible. And so I touched briefly on the question of when we'll be back in person. What we're going to do through the rest of the year is have our presenters present remotely, and then we'll be back in person when we can get a facility that's comfortable having the group there. So we're not sure about that. We haven't asked. Companies are just barely starting to bring their employees back, and letting a bunch of non-employees into the space is tricky, as you might imagine. So the idea is hopefully we'll be back in person soon. The presenter will present remotely, and then the crowd will be there, enjoy pizza, ask questions, and then we're going to make this Q&A interview style format a bigger part of the presentation. So we're going to save more time for this. Probably have like a little shorter presentations, and an interview section, or a full interview like this. So let me go to the next slide, which is Tech Systems here. So Kate is here from Tech Systems. She is Tech Systems, one of our diamond sponsors. So she's going to talk to you now. I will maximize her so everyone can see her. All right, go ahead, Kate.
Well, hi, everyone. Like Don said, I'm from Tech Systems. I've talked to an awful lot of you over the years, gotten to know some of you. This has been my favorite place to hang out while I've been at Tech Systems. UJUG is just awesome, and this is such a great industry. We are, if you have not heard of us and aren't familiar, we are the nation's leading IT staffing and IT services provider. We're in every single state and multiple countries. Being so widespread is why I get to have tons of awesome opportunities to talk to you about. And even if you're not necessarily looking for something new and you just want to learn about what's going on there, feel free to give me a call. I'm always happy to talk, always happy to grab lunch, always happy to just get to know you and learn more about what you do and teach you more about what we do if you want to know. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you, Kate, and thank you for the continued support. All right, so back to boring slides. I promise we'll get through this quick. All right, next, other sponsors. Lucid, software sponsor, Goldman Sachs, JFrog, Master Control, Overstock, and Applitools. All right, so upcoming next month, we've got Stephen Chin from JFrog coming to talk about DevOps tools. So DevOps space is still super hot. And we've got a whole presentation on tools specifically for developers. So that's August, September. We've got Kate Warden, sponsored by the UberConf. That's the No Fluff Just Stuff tour. And their big conference is October 5th through 8th. And we'll be giving away a pass for that next month and in September. So that's September. And then October, we're having Neil Ford come do another interview session just like this one. So Neil's a great presenter and has some wonderful, strong opinions about things. And I'm always interested to hear his perspective on the industry. All right, so door prizes. We've got 2 JetBrains licenses, 1 Agile Learner, that's Venkat's online training, and then 2, let's see, Kate, what did you want to do with the giveaway from Tech?
So, lately I've just been letting them pick. Some people have chosen Amazon. I know I did like the $25 gift certificates to the cookie place in the past, kind of in lieu of the fact that I wasn't bringing the cookies to the meetings anymore. But really, I have the ability to do e-gift certificates from a lot of places. So all I ask is that people choose something that, I can do online so that I can just send them an e-gift certificate by email. But really, we'll do 2 $25 gift certificates to the place of your choice.
Very good. All right. And so everyone here is automatically entered, but you have to be here at the end to win. It's that whole thing. You got to stay to the end, but you'll want to stay to the end. You won't want to leave a second early. So how about we get to it? So this is the picture of Mark presenting that record-setting crowd. So this is the forum there at Lucid Software, and I think it was like 224 I counted were there. And so I think, Mark, you were trying to beat Venkat, and you beat him by a little bit. And so that was you gotta get bragging rights. I told you to brag to him so he can come back out and try and beat you next time. So
we'll just have an ongoing war.
There you go.
An ongoing war. All right, very good. So let's see. I'm going to focus on Mark now, and we will get the interview started.
So,
all
Don,
right, Mark.
How long ago was that? That was 2 years ago, or maybe longer?
That was November of 2018.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, okay, I think it was November of 2018.
2.5 years ago. Wow.
Yeah. Because it was our last presentation of the year. And yeah, it was a blockbuster event. It was great.
That was fun. That was a good event.
Yeah. We'll get together again. It's not going to be long. We're on the road there. So why don't I let you introduce yourself a little bit for those who haven't aren't familiar with your background. So why don't you tell us about your background and your current passions?
Sure, absolutely. So I have actually been in the industry for 36 years now, and 26 of those as a software architect. So I've seen a lot in my industry. About the past, I would say 6 years or so, I've devoted most of my career to microservices, and that's helping companies migrate to microservices and also greenfield applications. And so that's been keeping me very busy. I still, even in the pandemic, still do quite a bit of training and conferences. I've been doing actually a little more consulting lately, especially since training is kind of a fluctuating kind of job. So, but I like that because it keeps me actually hands-on and actually in the field. So I've been doing that and keeping busy, and especially keeping very busy because this week is the last week that we are able to make any changes to our upcoming book, the one I'm writing with Neil Ford, Software Architecture, the Hard Parts. And so the Amazon page is actually out there and it's on pre-order, but Friday, which is actually tomorrow, is our ultimate no more typing deadline. So
wow.
Anyways, we're anxious for that to come out. So that has been keeping me extremely busy as well. So
interesting. Would you care to give the audience kind of a little preview of what they could expect in this book?
Yeah. So as most of you might know, back February of 2020. Yes, wow. Seems like such a long time ago, doesn't it? We released our book, The Fundamentals of Software Architecture. And that book really was, about the fundamentals in terms of a lot of the technical aspects, but also soft skills and techniques in software architecture. But Neil and I wanted to take that one step further and really talk about some of the harder stuff. And specifically, the book focuses mostly on distributed architectures and all of the hard parts and hard decisions and hard trade-offs that we need to make within distributed architecture. And so we really divide it into two main parts. The first half, which is part one, really deals with pulling things apart, how to decompose applications and determine, for example, the right level of service granularity and how to decompose data. And then part two is all about bringing all those parts back together in terms of communication, workflows, contracts, communication protocols, and transactional sagas, distributed transactions, all the real hard aspects of software architecture, especially distributed architectures. So we're really anxious for this book to come out. Been working on it for almost 2 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Exciting. How long is it?
So it will probably, our final copy will be around 450 pages long.
Wow.
We actually had to cut out about 160 pages of material just to keep it within a reasonable weight limit.
Wow.
When you're holding that book up, you don't want to have a stand for it. So yeah, but we tried to keep it under 450, and it's going to be a little bit of a challenge.
Oh, someone just posted a link to it in the chat.
Oh, thank you, Michael. Oh,
Michael
fantastic.
Green did. That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. All right. So I just want to remind everyone to use the Ask a Question feature there at the bottom in Crowdcast to ask your questions. So you talked a little about microservices there. The last presentation you did was called The Rise and Fall of Microservices. And it's been a couple years since then. What updates would you, the conclusions of that, would you, give a brief summary of the conclusions of that presentation, and then what you have, what's changed since then, or what has evolved, what new information?
Well, unfortunately, Don, not much has changed.
Okay.
A lot of what I talked about in that talk, and I still remember that well, were just some of the challenges that real challenges we face within microservices. And I'm still seeing those challenges rearing their ugly heads. And the real world challenges, code reuse, things about workflows, and kind of not trying to create a big ball of distributed mud. So I haven't seen a whole lot change from that regard, except I would say the only thing probably I'm seeing more awareness of actually are, in fact, some of those challenges within microservices, specifically with regards to data. And, kind of the first big wave was all the focus on breaking apart functionality. And well, we started to get it and understand it. But then we had to tackle the second biggest part, which was data, and necessarily breaking apart monolithic databases, which is really, really hard. I'm starting to see, actually, Don, there are a couple of things that I can say I'm actually
all right, good.
seeing.
Give us some hope.
Yes. And that is the awareness and acceptance that sharing data within a microservices ecosystem is actually okay. And as a matter of fact, while a lot of folks deem it an anti-pattern or something that you don't do, the problem is, in reality, data is coupled as well. And when we talk especially about relational data, not only the logical groupings of data, but all the other artifacts that exist, foreign keys, triggers, views, stored procedures, all this stuff that ties tables together. And if we're going to form a database per service kind of pattern, necessarily, we got to rip out all of those artifacts. And a lot of times it's just simply not feasible. The other problem we start facing are multiple services that need to write to the same data. A lot of times we try to implement what's called a table split pattern, which, let's say we have two services. I'll do a really good example. How about a product catalog service? So this is a service. I'm not going to use the word micro, but this is a service that does one thing really well, and that is it maintains all of the products that we sell and all of the relatively static information about it. However, suppose also that that table stores the current inventory counts of those products, so it's easy retrieval. But now we have an inventory service. So both services need to write to the same table. And this is a very common problem. And so kind of sharing data is one of those solutions to saying, well, we could try to split the table apart, and that might work where we have an inventory table, product table, but the two tables are still connected. They're still coupled, because if we remove a product or add a product, the other table needs to know about that product ID or item ID. So one of the other solutions is, of course, to delegate, which still requires a lot of communication between services. And so you can see it just gets messy. And there's all these messy trade-offs associated with that. But coming back to the main point is I have seen more of an acceptance in the clients I'm working at in being a little more lenient about the fact that there are use cases where we do need to sometimes share data into a single schema or database. So that is one of the things I am seeing that most folks were very reluctant to do. As a matter of fact, in 2018, when I was speaking there at the UJUG.
Very good. Very good. Okay. So this is, I got a question about when you go into different organizations, what are the kind of smells that you immediately catch on to for like a healthy culture and then like a healthy technical architecture? You know, like it's like, do you immediately know it's like, okay, you know, there's going to be a mess, you know, when I look at their charts, or, you know, tell me through that process. I'm fascinated by that.
Interesting. There's two aspects, I think. The organization, I would have to say, from observations, just looking at the environment, the number one thing for me for a health indicator is a high degree of collaboration. I think that would be the number one sign. For example, let's say I'm first day at the client site and I walk down to the development teams and everybody's just really quiet, all in their own desks, or hopefully not cubes, doing their own thing. Maybe that's okay, but if that continues, that's a sign for me that maybe this isn't as collaborative as it needs to be. What I love to see, what I have as an indicator of some really good health in an organization or teams, are when I see groups of 2, 3, maybe 4 people, maybe in a conference room or gathered around a machine or a workspace or in a certain area of the agile team area. That to me is one of the very first signs I see of a fairly healthy environment. But also it's architects. It's not only development teams, but it's also seeing the interplay and interactions between the architects, assuming that the company has them, and the development teams. And I look for that kind of collaboration. Do the developers tend to ignore the architects and just find them an annoyance? Or are they a valuable resource for the development teams? And so that's another indicator I have. But I think another one, also with environment, are the teams that are basically doing what works for them. And I'm going to give a very specific example. For example, an agile team that's stuck in a 2-week sprint, and they do 2-week sprints and no work ever gets done, and people start ignoring all the deadlines, versus being able to modify that and say, no, you know what works for us are variable sprints based on the kind of functionality or domain that we're working in. Maybe it's 3-week, but teams that basically do what works for them and not these prescriptive rote kind of rules shows to me that the team is aware of their strengths and weaknesses. and are able to kind of work on those. So
interesting. What other customizations have you seen people make to their workflow besides adjusting sprint length?
Yeah. So team size is another one. I have actually witnessed teams self-organize and break themselves up into multiple teams because the team size just gets too large. And so that's another modification that I've seen that was very, very interesting. Another one is starting to question and challenge some of the procedures and practices that we necessarily need to do. It's kind of interesting how, well, process, I guess, is unfortunately somewhat necessary, but not process for process sake. And starting to question, why do we always have to fill out this migration script or the migration form? I mean, we all know what we're doing. Why do we still need to fill that out? And starting to ask that why question. This is one of my favorites. Team member says, why do we have a 10 a.m. stand-up every single day on a Zoom call when we all know what we're doing? Oh, as a matter of fact, Don, I'm going to come back to your question because one of the indicators to me of a healthy, agile team is ones that do not necessarily have their daily stand-ups, because we all know what we're working on and what our roadblocks already are. We don't need a meeting to do that. And so that's another one that I've seen teams challenge, quite frankly. And so these are some of the indicators. One last one, by the way, are teams that have a really good understanding of the domain, the business problem, and also well-defined kind of domain responsibility and segregation. When the development team knows exactly the context of the changes or features or what we're doing, the migration, that seems to give teams renewed motivation.
Very good. Very good. All right, let's switch gears and get into some meaty technical topics. So what are some, best practices that you recommend when people are sizing their microservices? Everyone struggles with, how big, how small, and I've even heard the term nanoservices recently. Along that, there was the complaint that, okay, they're probably too small. So this issue has just been with us ever since we've had service-based architecture. What are the best practices that you focus on when you get that big question?
Yeah. I'd have to say service granularity and getting service granularity right is probably one of the many hardest things a team struggles with. The problem is we try to apply solid principles, for instance, or the single responsibility principle, SRP. And the problem is there's simply too much subjectiveness in single responsibility principle. One example I really love to give is a customer notification service. So let's say we have a microservice and it's single purpose. It does one thing really well. It notifies our customers of different things, but it does so through either texting, email, or postal letters even. So here's a good thought question for you. Is that single purpose? Or is having a texting service, an email service, and a postal letter service single responsibility? And I've done this poll before in trainings and at conferences. And every time I do it, you know what the results are? About 50-50.
Interesting.
Yeah. So basically, some of the, I won't call them best practices, but guidelines that I use are to objectively justify whether I should break apart a service. Code volatility is a really good one. So this is linked kind of to that volatility-based decomposition kind of practice. But what we do is we take a look at a particular service and say, is there a portion of that service that changes frequently and other parts that don't? Because if we can isolate that changed code into a smaller single-purpose service, then none of the other functionality needs to change, get tested, or redeployed. Scalability and throughput is another good driver. Certain features, for example, let's go back to our notification. Maybe we send several 100,000 texts a minute, but only a few hundred emails and maybe a letter or two every minute. The problem is that large service, that notification needs to scale to the maximum 200,000. And so this is another good driver for saying maybe we should break those apart. And fault tolerance is actually another guideline that I use for breaking these apart. Is there a portion of your service that fails more often than not, and it impacts other functionality? Because if it is, we can break apart that service, isolate that problem code, that error code, so that it may fail, but all the other functions are now running perfectly fine. And so those are some of the core ways of breaking apart a service. But the reason there's no best practice, Don, is because the problem is those are all good measurable justifications for breaking services and making them smaller. However, when you do that, there's trade-offs. When you break apart a service and it needs to communicate, you no longer have an ACID or database transaction. We forget that when we break apart services, we'll now need to form fairly tight bounded contexts. And the problem is, what if the data is related? And so that might force us to bring those services back together. What if we break apart all this functionality into separate services and they all need to talk to one another based on workflows? Then all of a sudden we're reintroducing a lot of issues. And so, Don, really it's about taking those drivers to break apart a service and the drivers to put it back together and balance those trade-offs and see what's more important, code volatility or an actual database transaction that I can do a commit and rollback on, because you can't have both. And so these are some of the guidelines, I'd say, more than best practices for some of the drivers and forming those trade-offs for service granularity.
So do you find that, having a consultant like yourself coming from the outside really helps people think through this? Like they could be too close to their own domain and, like they can't see it objectively. Or like when people are going through this process, what would you recommend? Is like a consultant really handy? I guess I'm giving you a softball for your services, but
Sure.
Yeah, it's such an important decision that has so much consequence. What do you recommend when people go through this? Because it's hard to change later.
It is. And I think one of the values, I've been a consultant for 35 out of the 36 years I've worked. I've actually been a consultant. And one of the things that I found is a consultant can bring to the table non-biased and non-personal kind of approaches to the team. For example, coming back to our service granularity question, things I've found, and of course it's human nature, start getting personal. If I feel so strongly that the notification service really should be single, it starts to become an obsession. And somebody else may say, no, I really feel strongly, and it's my strong opinion that it should be 3. And so what happens, I've observed, and this is again just human nature, is that unfortunately it starts to cloud over a lot of the other possible solutions objectively to try to justify these and to analyze the trade-offs. And I think that's one of the things that a consultant can actually do, coming in from the outside, void of a lot of the politics, the interpersonal relationships between team members, and just interactions. It really brings forth a more objective kind of view, I guess. So yes, I have found it extremely beneficial to bring out party, especially when it comes to validating a particular architecture or approach. And so coming in without, again, that history or kind of the interplay and interactions in a team is really valuable, and objectively being able to look at a solution and bring some other experiences in.
That's fascinating that the diplomacy of a consultant could be as valuable as their, technical acumen.
Oh, yeah.
So you said something to me before about the soft skills needed to be an effective technologist. And so you touched on it a little bit there. And could you talk about how important you think that is, as far as how much people need to invest in their soft skills and what are really important, and just some general guidelines for these are the things that are common mistakes need to look out for? Could you talk about soft skills a bit?
Yeah. So, I'm going to talk about it in two forms, Don. So I'm going to talk about it from an architect's standpoint, because as an architect, those soft skills, in my humble opinion, after 26 years, are literally half of being a software architect. Now, it's interesting because when we start talking about development teams, how important are soft skills? And it's not quite that kind of balance of 50-50, but it switches more over to maybe a 30-70 or even a 20-80, because as a developer, you're hired to develop code, and that's one of the main pieces. But nevertheless, even as a developer, we have to collaborate with others. We have to accept others' opinions. We get involved in situations of disagreements, and knowing how to properly negotiate and facilitate those is really key. Now, I did allude to the fact that half of being an architect are those soft skills, and understanding the political climate of the enterprise, being able to navigate politics, is such a key skill as an architect. Here's a really good example to illustrate my point of how important these soft skills are. So let's say you're a developer and you're working on some code, and all of a sudden you notice that you're starting to get a lot of cyclomatic complexity in that code, and a lot of nested ifs, and it's just starting to look a little ugly. So you stop, you reflect on it, you rewrite it using a strategy pattern, for example, and to really reduce that cyclomatic complexity. Is anybody going to challenge you on that? Let's say you're a developer and you notice that your class file is getting quite large, and you see, you know what, I'm going to functionally break this down into 2 class files. Is anybody really going to challenge you on that? Naming a function or a variable or even a method name? No. However, here's the little secret. You see, as an architect, almost every single thing that you do, every decision you make will be challenged. It's going to be challenged by other architects who have other ideas about how to form a solution. It's going to be challenged by business stakeholders who thinks it's too expensive or not enough time to do that. And it will also be challenged by developers who think they have a better idea on that solution. And so some advice I can give everybody here as a developer is enjoy being a developer while you can, because you have so much freedom to make so many choices. That's why negotiation skills, facilitation, team leadership are so key as an architect or even a tech lead. Leading and guiding development teams is one of the main duties of an architect. And collaborating with your team, these are all soft skills that are absolutely key and necessary as an architect. It's interesting. I was talking to my friend Neil Ford today, and he just recently, as a matter of fact, I think it might have been yesterday, I believe, or the day before, I just finished up the O'Reilly Superstream on architecture and soft skills. And Neil was a little concerned that I don't know if anybody's going to be interested in this. And they had over 900 people actually signed in, and the registrations, I think, were over three or maybe even 4,000 people. And so it kind of surprised him. It didn't surprise me when Neil told me that, but it did really surprise him. But that's how I think the awareness of soft skills in the industry. Let me just finish this question by just saying to everybody here, you all signed in and listening right now, I'm going to make the assumption, are really good technologists. You're really good at what you do. And so are 500,000 other people who would love to have your job. The soft skills, folks, is the differentiator. You can be a great technologist, a great architect. There's a lot of those out there. But being able to work with others in a team, being able to collaborate, willingness to accept others' ideas, these are the differentiators, everyone. And so we can't encourage you enough to focus on the soft skills.
Is there a good book or a good presentation that you could recommend if people want to explore this more?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. The last third of our book, The Fundamentals of Software Architecture, shameless plug, is devoted to soft skills. It's devoted to negotiation, facilitation, team leadership, collaboration, all of those things. However, aside from the shameless plug, Gregor Hope, who with Bobby Wolf wrote the Enterprise Integration Patterns book, recently published, I believe this was also last year, around when our book came out, called The Architect's Elevator. Another really good book about all the communication that needs to happen through the entire elevator of all of the stages of hierarchy within a company. One of the first books that I read that really woke me up to soft skills and the importance of those was actually an older book, and it's called Practical Guide to Enterprise Architecture by Steve McGovern and a whole bunch of others. Scott Ambler wrote in that book as well. That was the first technical book I actually ever picked up that started talking about the importance of soft skills and communication and collaboration, and really made an impression on me. So that's another older but really good resource as well.
Okay, so I want your thoughts on, like, before we move on, like the number one thing, if people are only going to like focus on one soft skill that you see lacking, what would that be? You know, like you see a lot of people struggle with this, you know, like what's the highest value one to focus on?
I'd have to come back to collaboration.
Okay.
Being able to, communication and collaboration are two important skills of any technologist. And communication is telling somebody about something. But collaboration is actually working with somebody else to form a solution and accepting somebody else's ideas, trying to understand those ideas and see how it plays out with your ideas. And this is hard, by the way, because most technologists are not people persons. We are problem solvers, and we like being alone to solve a problem, and that's what we do. And I would say that if I had to carve out or call out one particular soft skill across the board, whether it be an architect, a developer, a tech lead, any kind of role that you play in IT, that would be it, because it is probably one of the harder soft skills to actually acquire. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So let's go on to, you know, we talked a little bit about, you know, developers' role and coding. What do you feel is like the big secrets to writing maintainable code? Like the things, so go ahead with that.
Writing maintainable code. I'd have to say, I guess one of the first pieces is to have a junior developer be able to read your code. I have an immense amount of respect, for a developer who can write code in a very clear and concise manner that anybody can read. I don't have a lot of respect for tricky code or clever code or making code so concise to say, look, so-and-so did that in 5 lines, but I actually did it in 1. That's not impressing me. Yeah, so I think those are, some of the aspects that I would say are, that would be the first one that I could actually think about. But also actually, there's another one that comes immediately to mind. Modularity, and modularity. And you can put an exclamation mark after that last one.
Okay.
So yeah, those would be 2 of the things that have somebody else write your code, or no, don't have somebody else write your code. No, strike that from the record. If you can get that done, then you're on your way to a great career.
Yeah. Outsource your job.
Right. Have somebody else read your code. See if they can understand it. It's a really good litmus test to see if somebody else can maintain it as well. And also, I think, now a lot of things are coming to my mind. Meaningful method names and meaningful class names. I mean, these are just basics, and you might think that's so obvious, but I can't tell you how many code bases I still look at today with method names like process or meaningless names that I have to actually now go look at comments or documentation for. But yeah, when it comes to modularity, the driver pattern is one of my favorites within code. To be able to, let's say, place order. And instead of having a 500-line method, we have actually 6 lines in that method, and it points to other methods that are doing the lower level things. That's highly maintainable code in my mind, at least for me, because I can look at the flow of what happens when we place an order, check for overstock discounts, apply coupons. We have to calculate sales tax, VAT tax, all this kind of stuff. And I could see that flow happen. And then the details I can work on later if I need to. It's easy to find stuff with that kind of pattern. So that's another one that comes to mind too.
So when you're thinking of a method name and the signature, as far as the arguments, give me an example of what looks good when you're reading code. An example of a well-written method name and like the arguments that it takes.
Yeah. Calculate sales tax. There we go. What could be easier to understand? As a matter of fact, Don, I would, if I could find it really quick, I would really, really love to show you one thing. Okay. Let me see if I could find it. Okay. I bet I can find it in 1 second here. That really, really does show and illustrate exactly what I talk about. I found it. Okay. So let me show you a method. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to share my screen here. And let's see how this works. Play slideshow in window. So I want to show you some code. Okay. And here's a challenge for all of you listening, because now this is Java code, but it is UJUG. And I'm assuming the J stands for Java. So I think we're okay there.
Yes.
So I'm going to show you some code. So, okay, I got the screen up here. Let me get back here. And now if I can only remember how to share. Oh, share. There it is. Okay, everybody, I'm going to show you a slide. And tell me, the first one who can tell me exactly what this code does. Ready? And share. And let's share the event. Options. Don, how did we share?
So there should be some tools at the top of the video feed where you see yourself.
Yep, I see myself, and I do see help. I see share, but the share basically is share the event.
So you'll see like the microphone.
No, you know what? It's interesting. There they are. Oh, they hid away. Okay, here we go. All right, I found it. All right, everybody, ready, set, and what does this code do?
Let me maximize it. All right, it's visible now for everyone. So everyone type it in the comments here.
And the answer is not adjust the number.
Oh my goodness.
What does this code do? This comes back to our old arithmetic operator precedence that we learned about 20, 30, maybe 40 years ago. Yeah, well, I'll tell you, it's complicated. Oh, there you go. It melts my brain. That's exactly what it does. Okay, so
is that the correct answer?
And I don't want to waste too much time because truly this does, in fact, take about 3 to 5 minutes to figure out what it does. But I'm going to show you some other code. And let me know in the chat what this does. Ready, set, and go. What does that do? That's easy, isn't it? How long did that take to figure out what that code did right there? Of course, it doubles if even. Yeah. Yep, it does what it says it does. Exactly. As a matter of fact, if we're really not too sure about the name double if even, look at if x mod 2 equals 0, then return it doubled. Otherwise, just return the number. So it doubles it if it's even. And I could have written that in one line, but it's clearer here and may modify that. But you know what's really funky, everyone? These two things I'm showing you here, they do the exact same thing. Yes, this is called accidental complexity. So here's a really good example of what I mean about nonsensical code. We try to show off our technical prowess by saying, look at the tricky code I can do. Ha, ha, ha. But you know what the top one does? It actually doubles a number if even. And you can copy paste this and throw it inside VC and run it. And you'll see, in fact, it does double a number if even. Oh, it appears as though, yeah, people are able to see that full screen, I'm guessing.
Yep,
I hope
they should be able to.
Yeah. So, anyways, this is an example, and let me come back here to how do we now stop? Oh, close video. I'm seeing how to close.
I can do unfocused screen, and then
there we go.
Then you can stop sharing, and it will.
Oh, okay. So let me get back to that magical hidden toolbar that.
I can there it is too.
Yep. So. Close video. Huh, it doesn't allow me to. Okay, I'll close it and then I will get out of the way again. Yeah. I got so excited by that. I actually I forgot what the question was.
Oh, we were talking about good method signatures.
Yes, there's a good example of what I mean. Now, a little extreme, but here's a challenge. Just take a look at your method names even. Just something as simple as that. And do you need a comment to describe it? So it's probably not an appropriate name. And so, yeah. Oh, that's right. It was on maintainable code. Yeah. Yep. All right. So we got some questions flowing in. So let's get to some of them here. I would like to hear more on how to validate the infrastructure you have architected. So that's an interesting question. So validating architecture. Okay. Interesting. How do you validate an architecture that so there's a couple of things that come to mind. Number one, probably the first thing immediately is hire me to review it. No, I'm kidding. I love these more informal sessions. I can actually tell jokes. Although that's one of the other things, by the way, that's really hard in virtual kind of environments. No one laughs at your jokes. So yes, anyways, part of validating it is also understanding, first of all, some of the drivers. And what I mean by drivers are those architectural characteristics that the architecture is trying to support. For example, are you trying to achieve high levels of scalability and elasticity? Is it more a responsive architecture? Does the architecture support a lot of change or extensibility, agility, for example? And understanding those allows you to then look at that architecture in that light. And so there are probably 100 different ways to architect any given solution. You give me a business problem, and I could show you 50 to 100 architectures that are all different in one little way or another that would all work. How do you know if mine's right? How do you know if it will work? So that's probably the strongest aspect I could think about in terms of just validating those. And this is a matter of taking a look also at something called architectural risk analysis. It's looking at those characteristics from a risk standpoint. Is there security risk? Do you have any single points of failure, for example? One of the things I like to do to validate an architecture or even a design or even an approach that I'm thinking of is to do something called risk storming. Now, this is something that is in our Fundamentals of Software Architecture book, and that's on the last third about just analyzing risk. Risk storming involves a collaborative effort where everybody is looking at the architecture from their own perspective, which could be different than yours. And it's a wonderful way of identifying risk areas based on a certain dimension. And here's the important part, that's important to you. So I would not undergo a risk storming effort where we're all collaborating and identifying risk on performance if performance isn't important to us. And so understanding those drivers is really the first key to validating, in my opinion, an architecture.
Very good. All right. So a little bit of a longer question here. What are some good mental models for modularizing data deployments? Erlang processes and message passing seem to give the benefits of a unified deployment environment with the process scalability advantages of a microservice deployment model, yet with one database. How do we avoid premature database modularization?
Mm-hmm. One of the drivers, the main drivers for breaking apart data within microservices and forming that bounded context is change control. And I think this is one of the very, very first things that I would look at. The more services you start creating or producing that talk to a single database or a single schema, this is the very first problem that starts to rear its ugly head. And what I mean by change control is actually changing the structure of the data, not the data itself, but the structure in relational database. For example, dropping a column, renaming a column, removing an attribute. These things happen. They're part of a natural life cycle of any application. And once you start missing things or start to say, well, every time we make a database change, we have to modify 2/3 of our services, which means when I do a database migration to production, I have to coordinate all of those dozens to hundreds of services at the same time. Good luck with that. And because that's only half the story. You do that migration, and all of a sudden, 2 or 3 services aren't responding. They continue to fail, start up, fail, start up, fail, start up, because you forgot about them. And folks, those services are non-operational now until they're fixed. This is not something you simply just roll back in a highly distributed architecture like microservices. That's probably, I would say, 70% of the drivers that I can mention is really about change control. I mean, this is why we form bounded contexts. So that when I change data, I'm the one that changes because you're asking for the data through a separate contract. I don't have to modify that contract necessarily, but I can modify my internal structures of my data anytime I want to. That's a very, very powerful concept within distributed architectures. Beyond that, we start getting into other issues associated with, for example, connections to the data. Are we having connection weights? When we start scaling out services, each instance of a service needs a connection, or sometimes even has the connection pool associated with it. When we start orchestrating services, I orchestrate 15 services to give me all my information. They're run in parallel, so I'm multicasting those, but those are taking up 15 database connections for one request. And so that's number 2, I would say, is to watch out for connections to a particular database. Again, these depend on the database type. Scalability and fault tolerance, I would say, are the other kind of more minor ones, but still drivers. Because if you lose that single database or cluster, nothing is running now. And so it also needs to scale as your services scale. This is a lesson learned that I can share with you. Don't get too excited about Kubernetes auto-scaling features. Because while one service scales, what about services that you're synchronously talking to? Those correspondingly have to scale. And all of a sudden, your auto-scaling is a very complex graph of scaling up not only service A, but B, C, D, and E at the same time. But also, don't forget that the database needs to scale correspondingly. And so those are really some of the comments I would make about single database usage. But again, that change control is primarily the biggest one in my book, at least, and also in my experience.
Very good. The asker of the question was very happy with your answer there. All right. The next question is deliverables / artifacts to architect. With question mark, how do architect better communicate the architectural decisions? Would it help architects not to be frequently challenged? So it looks like the question is, how do architects better communicate?
Yeah. So it's funny there. When architects make blah, blah, blah. Let me start over. When architects make decisions, which that's our job as an architect, is to make decisions, there are actually 3 anti-patterns associated with making decisions as an architect. These all have play on words, which are kind of interesting. But the first one is actually, and I'm going to actually type these into the chat, called covering your assets anti-pattern. That's the first one. The imagery is of a donkey that has a blanket over it. But basically, this is the fear of making a decision because you're afraid you're going to make the wrong one. And architecture decisions are expensive and impact a lot of, code and structure. However, once you've made a decision, and you'll see why I'm doing this progression because it actually answers your question. Once you make a decision, it usually leads to the second architectural anti-pattern that exists in decision-making. And that is called the Groundhog Day anti-pattern. So the Groundhog Day anti-pattern is where no one knows why you made a decision. So it just keeps getting discussed over and over and over throughout the company, meeting after meeting. And this is all about justifying your decisions. Now, let's get to the bottom line of your question. Because once you've made a decision, then you've justified it, how do you effectively communicate your decision? And as a matter of fact, all of you are probably familiar with EDA, right? Event-driven architecture. Well, EDA actually is an acronym for something else. It's called, and I'm going to type it in here, email-driven architecture. Email-driven architecture is where we basically blast out our architecture decision through email, and people lose, forget, or don't even know that a decision's even been made. How can they possibly follow it? Look, everyone, Outlook is a great communication vehicle. It just makes a horrible document repository system. And the problem is, if I blast out an email decision to you, assuming that you read it and get it, what happens if I change my mind? Well, first of all, let's say I blast that out to all 85 people here. How many systems of record exist for my architecture decision? And the answer is 85. And when I change my mind on something, or maybe say, no, those services really should be consolidated, and here's why, and only half of you read that particular email. Yeah. So one of the ways of effectively communicating an architecture decision, first of all, is by justifying it. And here's a standard template I use. I do use email, by the way, because it is effective to communicate an architecture decision. I like it because it's more of a push than just kind of putting it on the wiki and hope that people read it. Now, if you write it, they will read it is not necessarily true. So here's my common template. So let's see. Hi, Gregory, comma. I made an important architecture decision regarding the admin services that directly impacts you. Please see that architecture decision here with a link to our wiki, where it is. Thanks, comma, Mark. And if you analyze that common template I use, this solves email-driven architecture anti-pattern. It overcomes it. Hi, Gregory, comma. I made an important architecture decision. All right, so now that directly, involving the admin services. I'm telling you the context, but I didn't tell you the architecture decision regarding those admin services. So I made an important architecture decision involving the admin services, ready, that directly impacts you. What do you think the first thing Gregory's going to do if he reads that? Gregory's going to click the link.
He's going to click that link. That would be a great phishing email too. You know, everyone's going to click that link.
It really would. Yeah. But here's the power of saying that, because if I'm writing that and I'm sending it to Encore, well, I got to make sure that it directly impacts Encore or Carlos or Kent. Because if it doesn't, why am I sending that to you? That's noise. I want to send you signal. And so these are some of the ways of effectively communicating architecture decisions. Now, I am a huge proponent, and I do use ADRs, architecture decision records. And so that is an effective way of documenting your architecture decision with the justification and consequences. But communicating it is a whole different ballgame. So those are some of the tips I use. Long question, long answer.
Yeah, that was good stuff. All right, let's keep going. Got a question from Ankur. Could you explain what's a good approach to WebRTC?
Wow, what is a good approach to WebRTC? And so this, I will have to say, is not in my sphere of influence or experience. And so that one, I have no comment on.
All right, fair enough. I like that. That's good for an architect to like. Not my wheelhouse, right?
Yeah, actually, you know what? That actually is one of my pieces of advice that I give people when they ask, Mark, I'm just about to have an interview. Can you give me some advice? And that is actually one of 3 pieces of advice I give. Don't BS your way through an answer you don't know. You know, maybe ask for clarification and say, well, I'm not familiar with that acronym. Oh, yeah, remote transfer. Oh, yeah, that. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes we work on something, but we're not sure of the buzzword. But that's really advice I give is if you don't know something, then say, you know, that's not within my realm. I've not worked on that. Next, because that's one of the ways of starting to say, I'm going to start questioning all of your other answers now.
All right.
But two other pieces of advice, as long as we're in
I was going to ask, because like you can't tease all 3 and give us one. So,
all right. So don't BS your way through a question you don't know. Just say you don't know, and I respect that. It's like, okay, let's move on. Number 2, be confident. It's hard to do that. Especially, most people are very nervous going into an interview because it's like, look, I need this job, and you're going to ask me questions I may not know. But try at least to exhibit a lot of confidence. And the third piece of advice is stay in control. Be in control of the interview. And by that, I mean, ask questions. In other words, it's very interesting when I do interviews for consulting gigs, I'll start answering questions, but then I'll start asking questions because I myself want to know if this is the right place for me. Now, I know as the interviewer, you're trying to see if I'm the right person for you. But I also want to know, is this the right place for me? Am I going to be happy here? Am I going to be doing what I like to do? And so many times we'll get about a third the way through the interview, and all of a sudden the interviewers will stop and say, you're kind of taking over the interview, aren't you? And I was like, yeah, pretty much. I just want to make sure this is that I can help you, that this is actually something that I want to do and that I'd be able to help you with. And usually that transparency and honesty actually goes a long way. And it's like, okay, well, what other questions do you have? And it's like, well, I'd like to see the development teams. No, we can't take you down there. Well, now I'm getting nervous because is there a reason why I can't visibly see developers at work? And so, anyways, those are just some tips. Yeah.
I'm imagining like a dark basement, filled with troglodytes that they're not proud of, down there. All right, we got another question from the audience. This one's from Chayton. Starting from monolith and decoupling to microservice increases cost, and developer thinks it's a lot of rework. How do you handle it in your projects?
Wow. Well, very first, what's the reason for your decomposition to microservices? That would be the very, very, very first question out of the starting gate. Because if there's a question about, well, this is costing a lot, this is causing me a lot of rework, I think this is silly. Asking that as a developer, why are we doing this? And if we can't justify why we're moving to microservices, then maybe we shouldn't be moving to microservices. Maybe we should, but we don't know. So that's really the very, very first thing. Is it because we're shutting down on-prem operations and moving to cloud-based deployments? That's one possible driver, especially if it has business drivers behind the movement to cloud. Maybe it's for better agility or scalability or fault tolerance or extensibility. But there's probably a good technical and business reason why we're doing this. So immediately that question tells me that those reasons probably haven't been, if they do exist, communicated to the development teams. And that would be absolutely number one. But beyond that, beyond the why piece, which is probably the key part, is really talking to the developers and the development team or whoever's kind of challenging this to really take to heart, well, what do you mean? What do you see as extra rework? Because this is actually supposed to simplify maintainability. Maybe I, as the architect who justified this, am missing something. And so now we can form a collaboration where I'm trying to understand the developer's position and problem and trying to seek why it's now all of a sudden extra rework and cost, whereas it shouldn't probably have been in the first place. So those would be some of the main indicators if I was dropped directly into that kind of situation.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, I like that. Communicating the reasons why. I've heard that a lot from great leaders.
Yeah. I also think, though, I do have a secondary answer to that, more technical than the why question. And that is the method by which you are, in fact, decomposing your monolithic system. So there's two main approaches to this, tactical forking and component-based decomposition. And both of these have very different kinds of approaches. Tactical forking is like sculpting. And this is where we actually replicate the monolith. And when I say replicate, we literally copy the code to a new workspace or project. And two different teams or three different teams, however much we replicate, work in parallel to start carving off pieces we don't need. kind of like sculpting a block of ice, or in fact, maybe a chunk of marble or granite. Component-based decomposition is where we do the exact opposite. It's more about extraction. And so we're taking pieces and kind of forming well-defined components that sit in well-defined domains, extracting those domains out of the application. And then from there, start to partition some of the components into smaller services, again, if needed. So another indicator, whoever asked the question, really would also be the approach that you're taking to actually move the application to microservices. The elephant migration anti-pattern. It's an anti-pattern I coined actually within a training I was doing. We kind of came up with the old joke, how do you eat an elephant? And it was one bite at a time. And collectively, it's like, that sounds like an anti-pattern. It's like, yeah, it's got to do with elephants. Hey, how about the elephant migration anti-pattern? And that's just taking your monolith and start chewing away at it one bite at a time. And I can tell you from experience, lots of experience, doesn't work really well. And so that might be another reason why you start getting pushback, is because of the overall approach that you're taking to breaking apart that monolithic application.
So the elephant anti-pattern, what is the converse of that? What is the appropriate pattern?
So I like to use component-based decomposition, and this is a set of 6 patterns that really refactor and create what's essentially a clean architecture within your monolith. You see, one of the pitfalls of migrating to microservices, and this is part of that elephant migration, is just starting to cherry pick classes and functionality here and there throughout your monolith that you think might be a good service. Did you ever walk down the sidewalk on a nice hot summer day and you're talking to your friend or somebody, and all of a sudden you step down on the sidewalk and feel that squish when you step in the gum, and you get really mad and you lift your sandal up and it's all stringy and all, all gooey? Well, that's exactly what that kind of migration will look like. Because if you cherry pick a particular couple of classes, let's say, that do some functionality and try to lift them out of that monolith, that's like just lifting up some gooey, sticky gum that's on the sidewalk, because all these other classes that are dependent on that are going to start to come out with it. And then you cherry pick another class and start moving that, and all these other files move with it, including the ones that are already in that other microservice. It's never ending. It's just an unstructured approach to take a big ball of distributed mud, or taking a big ball of mud and making it a big ball of distributed mud.
Nice.
Or what some people call a distributed monolith.
Distributed monolith. Oh my goodness. All right. We got another question. This one from Unnamed. With remote work, what tools do you recommend to create value as an architect to an enterprise?
Wow. So, of course, we all have our platform of choice, whether it be Teams or Zoom or other kind of collaborative video things. But in addition to that, as an architect, architects draw lines in boxes. We render ideas on whiteboards and collaborate with others on that. And so to that end, a couple of tools I've grown very fond of for collaboration. Google Drawing is one that I use quite often. This is pretty much most of Visio with collaboration. And what it allows us to do is to be able to draw on a canvas using a lot of the standard Visio, or in my case, Omnigraphal, because I am a Mac user, images, so it's not all freehand drawing, and be able to collaborate. So instead of somebody saying to me, well, wait a minute, you see that box to the third to the left? No, not that one, the one below that one. Yeah, that one. Why is it connected to that box, the one 7 over to the right? Why is that line that, oh my gosh, this meeting is going to go on forever, or this collaboration? And so rather, we can all work on that same canvas and say, why don't we move that over there? And somebody just grabs the box and moves it over, and connects it to something else. And it's like, I didn't think of that. That actually reduces a hop. Touche, good job. So, any of those kind of drawing tools, Draw.io is another one I know is a lot of people use, but these kind of, I like the freeform, and I do use freeform for ideas because it's a virtual whiteboard essentially. However, if I'm doing some more sophisticated drawing, I do like the templates that exist, like in Omnigraphal or Visio, and I find those exist in things like Google Drawing and stuff.
Very good. And I also have to put a plug in for one of UJUG sponsors, which is Lucid Software. They have a
how could I forget?
diagramming tool and a collaborative whiteboard tool that was introduced in the last year. So
yes,
I have to put
charts.
that in there.
How can I forget? Yes.
All right. We have another question from Ankur. What are some good best practices points for observability?
Observability, that's kind of interesting. A couple of tips I can think of. First, when we talk about observability, in a distributed architecture, this starts getting a little bit complicated. Not all architectures support levels of observability. And so part of what I try to urge are a couple of things. First, the mechanisms that we leverage observability for. For example, let's say distributed logging. Our applications have logging, and so why not use that to be able to start doing some traceability? That's one very inexpensive, cheap way of doing that. However, what it does require is a context. Now, one of the things I found, and when I say context, is to get observability and traceability within our distributed architectures. And necessarily, we need to know the story of what happened. Why did order 1, 2, 3 just simply disappear? Mark, go look for that. Okay. Well, I've got a lot of request IDs, and a lot of go-to solutions basically say, well, every request has a generated request ID, and we can tie all these requests together with a request ID. Well, that's wonderful. And that's usually like a UUID or a GUID. That's all well and good. But how do I find order number 1, 2, 3? And so what I like to do at the very start of any sort of migration or greenfield is not to treat observability as a bolt-on towards the end of a project, the wax or the shine we start putting on our application, but rather from the very, very start. And the first thing I like to do is identify a context. See, every request you make in the system has some sort of context. Is it an order? Is it a trade? There's some context that we have, and it's identifying what that context is. And consequently from there, the order associated with that. So that now, if I have an order number, I can start tracing to find out what the request ID originally was for that particular order number. And now I can use that traceability to find out where it basically just disappeared or what path it took through the system. Now, that's a pretty traditional, cheap way of doing observability. However, I like to do observability in other aspects as well, because that's just observing where the requests go. However, observability expands beyond that as a characteristic. I just made a whole bunch of changes to the application. Did I impact any scalability? Did I impact our responsiveness for other services, maybe downstream? I have no idea. I tested my service. I'm not concerned about other services I'm going to deploy. And so part of observability is also gathering various metrics. And a lot of times I just do this if I don't have a lot of the tools where I can actually extract that information, such as maybe Kubernetes or Prometheus or any of these kind of monitoring tools. I'll just roll my own. This is where I typically use things like Apache Kafka, for example. I will simply stream out all of my response times or uptime or any kind of metrics that I can gather as a service and start streaming that just down to Kafka. And I can write subscribers that can look at all sorts of those metrics to really determine, wait a minute, now response time's going up. Did you just make a change? I did. I deployed 2 days ago. Well, look at this. And we can actually see the trend that it's actually gone up. And so different aspects of observability there when we start talking about that.
Very good. Very good. All right. So we've got about 10 minutes left. So I want to wrap up with some kind of big picture questions.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see the real innovation happening in our industry right now? Where are the exciting things where you're seeing a lot of bright people focus their energy and such?
Yeah. 2 areas, if I were to think about innovation. And that is, well, of course, the clear innovation is happening in ML and AI. But aside from those, and maybe in conjunction with those, operational automation or any sort of automation is really the biggest innovation that I see happening in multiple facets, but especially operational automation. Things, especially when we start breaking apart our applications, are getting very complex. As a matter of fact, I'm reminded of the book Influx, where programming became so complex, humans were not able to grasp it anymore. And so robots basically programmed. And I think about that quote in that book because this level of operational or any sort of automation, whether it be operational, automated governance, these are some of the main innovations that I'm seeing happening just based on us as humans not being able to manage all the things we need to manage. But the other thing that I've seen a trend of from an innovation standpoint is the reemergence of the low-code, no-code movement. And not surprisingly, I do have some strong opinions loosely held about the low-code, no-code movement. And as an architect, I don't evangelize it or diss it. But what I analyze are the trade-offs. Because this level of innovation, businesses are changing too rapidly. And unfortunately, IT sometimes struggles keeping up with that change. Isn't it interesting? It used to be the other way around, where we would need to change in IT and the business is like, oh no, that's years to do. But now it seems to be reversed, where businesses start changing their business models and operations on a dime. And we in IT are expected to immediately conform to that. And sometimes that's just not possible. So yeah, we get faster development. We can focus more on the business problem as opposed to the lower level code and stuff. And that's really, I think, what's driving that innovation of the newer low code, no code movements. However, I say newer because is it innovative or not is the question. I've been using these kind of environments for, well, decades, I will say. And the problem is the trade-off of that faster development is the lack of flexibility and that old 10% trap. You know, with these environments, we can get 90% there faster than anything. And that last 10% takes you forever to implement. And so, in my opinion, if this is one of our innovators that we're working on, and this movement is happening, by the way, I think it's more now understanding the education that's needed about the trade-offs in terms of the lack of flexibility and those last 10% pieces that are extremely difficult to implement in some of these environments.
Fascinating. I love that answer. All right, we just have a few minutes left. I just want to ask about your general attitude towards life. You just seem so positive, so energetic. You know, every time I interact with you, I just feel like I've absorbed some life force. So tell me, where does that come from? You know, where does this energy come from? Yeah. You know, we want to be more like you. Tell us how we can do that.
Words I live by: work hard and play hard. In other words, I like to seek out things I enjoy. And part of the ease for me on that is I love what I do. Part of that energy, Don, really comes from a passion of loving what I do, and a passion for technology, a passion for architecture, a passion for solving problems. And I always have been. I mean, this has always driven me. And my friend and I from college, we made one of those, kind of, cut your hand, and it's not very healthy now, but cut your hand and shake, a blood pact is what it was, that neither of us, this after a lot of drinks, by the way, but, and yes, it did hurt, but we made a pact together, a blood pact, that we would never take a job of something that we didn't like or love to do. Now, have I taken consulting gigs that were like, oh, this is a bummer? Sure. And it's short-lived. I could do pretty much anything for a month or two. But that was one of the things that we just observed, even at that young age in college, too many unhappy people who were unsatisfied with their job, with work, with what they were doing. And so that's words I live by. That's what keeps me active and engaged and just energetic.
Very good. What are some of your hobbies or things you do with your free time that you feel helps with your mental clarity and your mental agility?
I've got three, two main ones, as you can see in the back there. Some of you might see my my violins and fiddles. As a matter of fact, do you know the difference between a violin and a fiddle?
The devil uses one.
That's one,
not
answer.
the other.
A fiddle has beer stains on it. Yeah.
Oh, very nice.
It's the same instrument. It's just how you play it. But yeah, music. I play the fiddle. I play the guitar, the baritone uke. I love that. That just, sometimes I take my guitar downstairs, which is why it's not hanging up there right now. And I'll just sit there and play for an hour. Just to clear my mind. Hiking is the other one. That's one of my other passions, I guess, in life. Being outdoors and hiking in the woods or in the desert doesn't matter. That re-energizes me. It clears my mind, and it's really a renewal experience for me. So those are my two primary. I love kayaking, but I don't get to do that often. So those are my primary two.
Kayaking.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we just got, like 2 minutes left. Is there anything else you want to say to the audience? Things that we didn't ask about. What else is on your mind you feel like that we would benefit from?
I think I do. I think kind of the last thing I would say is I actually applaud all of you. I know it's late here in Boston where I'm at, but you're taking your evening and listening to and engaging in and participating in a user group or a conference and stuff. And I guess that's probably my last words of advice is keep doing that. We don't have a lot of opportunities here in kind of this still pandemic where we're all remote to talk to people, to get new ideas. And this is where they come from. Conferences, user groups. I really encourage all of you to, if you see something that's off topic, attend it. This is how you broaden your horizons and start investigating things that you may not have found that you like, and all of a sudden you really like. I mean, most of us are college graduates, and I'm sure most of you remember part of the college experience is taking a variety of classes and something that says, oh, that really confirmed I do not like chemistry. But sometimes all of a sudden you'll take a class and it turns your whole world around. And we don't have to stop just because we're not in college doing that. And so I guess I'm just applauding all of you for continuing to keep this user group alive, to continue participating in it, and just continue learning.
Very good. Yeah. I really enjoy that high that you get when going to a conference and you got speakers like yourself. You just like, this is why I got into development. It's just this shot of energy.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mark.
All right.
I really appreciate your time. It's been wonderful. Okay. So now we will go to our prizes. Let me bring back here. So we've got the JetBrains licenses. The first JetBrains license goes to Alia Elijah, joining from Canada. Alia, are you still online to claim your prize? This is one of the benefits you get from staying the entire time. Okay, the next, let's see, we'll give Alia a bit to respond. The next winner is Fahim Farouk. Fahim, are you joining from Sri Lanka? Are you still online, Fahim? And the next winner is Vijay from Bothell. If you are online. Oh, the randomizer chose Mark. Sorry, Mark, you're not eligible to win.
Wait a minute, I'm here. I stayed to the end.
You did. You stayed to the end. That is true.
All right, how unfair is
that? The rules.
How unfair is that the speakers are never eligible for prizes? I don't like that idea.
Yes, that is true. All right. So the next one, we have Caleb Codes from Salt Lake. Caleb, are you still online? And then Jonita. I actually know Jonita. I used to work with her. Jonita, are you still online?
Oh, Caleb.
There you go. Caleb's here. Very good, Caleb.
Here.
You win a JetBrains license. Let me just make sure I put that in there. Let's see. Ying Han, are you still online? I'm going to start choosing people from the live list to save us some time. Stephen Sheard, are you still here? You win a JetBrains license. Oh, Ying responded. Okay, so Ying, you win the JetBrains license, and then Stephen Sheard, are you still here? And then Shaitan. Oh, Jonita's here. Okay, so Jonita, you win the Agile Learner, and now we go to the $25 gift certificates from Tech Systems. So we've got 2 of these. I am actually going to. Ankur, are you still here? Ankur asked a lot of great questions. So this is karma.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Ah, yes.
Yes, Ankur, yes, congratulations. You win the $25 gift certificate. I've already got your email from the registration here. So let me record that. Okay, and then one more gift certificate. We will go to Justin Andrews. Are you still here, Justin? All right. So that's it for the meeting. Remember, next month we've got, let's see, we got the DevOps tools for developers from Stephen Chin of JFrog, and hope to see you all then. Thank you all for spending your valuable time with us. I hope you found it worth it, and please tell a friend. That's it. Thanks, everyone. Good